Hello my gorgeous friends on the internet, how you all doing? Okay, so it's been a long time I did this stuff with you guys. So it's been probably 2 weeks now since I uploaded my last video. So today I decided, though the reason why I haven't uploaded a video was because I have some project I've been building and it's actually taking lots of my time. So I decided to just spend the video for now for those few period. But I really felt bad because I didn't give you guys new content to see and watch and also learn from. So today I decided to just create a mini tutorial concerning state management, also how to manage your application state using the provider package. Okay, so this is just more like a demonstration of how to use provider. It's not more like, so in the, let me say, maybe in the future video I'm going to create a full application and showcasing how to use the provider in that application to manage your state. Okay, so basically provider, as we all know, or as I would say, is a state management package. So for Flutter, so just as we have other management library package for other platform like the readers, the get it for Flutter and the rest of them. So provider is one of my favorite state management plugin package. Okay, so it's actually the second package I've used, which is the first one was block and the second one is this provider, and I just fell in love with provider because of its ease of doing things and manage my states efficiently. Okay, so and one thing I want you to know about is that if you're building a small kind of app, let's say like this counter app now, which I'll be using to demonstrate, is more like an ephemeral app. Okay, so ephemeral app or ephemeral state is more like, it's called a local state. So it's a state you can neatly contain in a single widget. So in this kind of state, you don't really, there is no need to use state management techniques. Okay, uh, on this kind of state. So all you need is just a normal stateful widget, just as we have for this counter app. So there's no need to use any state management to handle this stuff because there is no external widget that is calling on this particular page. It's just doing everything here and utilizing all its methods inside here. Okay, and the other state that I want you to know about is the app state. So is a state that is not ephemeral. Okay, so that you want to share across many parts of your application and that you want to keep between user sections. So that's what we call app state. Sometimes you can call it shared state, so other states can actually access the method in that particular state. Okay, so without further ado, this is the counter app that you get whenever you create a new Flutter application. So this is it, and just a basic counter app, and you can see if we click on this button, it's actually incrementing the counter by 1. But now what I want to do is I want to demonstrate how to use provider to actually increment this stuff and manage your state instead of using set state. We are going to use the provider package to manage our application. So there's something I want to show you here now. If you print, let's say we print this stuff here now. Hello. Okay, so that's just gibberish I'm typing there. So if I do this now and save this application, okay, so if you see, anytime I press this stuff, that hello keeps printing out, because whenever we call set state, it's rebuilding the whole widget and it's not something we want. We just want that particular section that we want to update to only rebuild instead of rebuilding the whole widget. So in this case now, if I print this stuff out, you can see it's actually rebuilding the widget whenever I click, and it's printing this stuff. That's how I know it's rebuilding it. So let's see how to fix this stuff and to like make this counter increment based on our state management approach. Okay, so I believe you already know that Flutter is a declaration. Okay, so before we can start working with provider, we need to add a dependency. Okay, so we need to depend on it, and to do that, you can go to the site, go to your browser and just type provider for Flutter, and you should get this URL. So you should get this provider 5.0.0. so this is the current version as at the time I'm creating this video. Okay, and you can see this badge, which is Flutter favorite. That means Flutter actually they're using it for their apps, and mark it favorite. And this is a no safety version. Okay, so I believe currently I'm not no safety, but you can still migrate. That no issue with that. Okay, so now we are going to go to the installing tab, and this is going to show us how to install it. So this is the preferred way I normally use. So just run flutter pub add provider. So you can just copy this instead of adding this stuff to your prospect.yaml file. So go to your terminal, okay, and we want to paste this in, and okay, so just give it time. It's going to install the necessary packages that is required for the provider. Alright, and it's running flutter pub get for us, and we just have to wait for that to complete. Okay, so once it's done, I normally like running my flutter pub get twice, so I want to run it again to be sure that the provider, everything is okay. So now if you go to your prospect.yaml file, you should see the provider added, okay, automatically for us whenever you run this stuff. Okay, whenever you run this stuff, yeah, it has been added. So if you also want to remove from here too, you can just change this stuff to remove instead of add. Since you know the name, just call flutter pub remove, then the name of the dependency or the plugin, so it's going to remove it for you. All right, so I think I'm talking a lot here. Okay, so now the next thing we are going to do is, let's see if, okay, so just depend on it, and the next thing we're going to do is to import. All right, so right now I don't think I need your documentation. All right, so let's do this real quick. All right, so I have my application up and running. So since I added a new plugin, I will have to stop this application and then rebuild it again, okay, to avoid platform exception. Okay, so now we have that. With provider, you don't need to worry about any callbacks or any form of inherited widget, because inherited widget is more like the low level states, I believe. So under the hood, provider is actually using inherited widgets, okay, to manage the state. So while working with in provider, there are a few things I want you to know, and I'm going to be talking about them in this video. Basically 5 of them. So one is the ChangeNotifier, and the second one is the ChangeNotifierProvider. We also have the MultiProvider. We also have the consumer, and we have the provider as well. Okay, so we are going to take this one step at a time. So the first one I'm going to look at is the ChangeNotifier. So it's more like a simple class that is included in the Flutter SDK. So it does not come with provider. Basically, it's included inside the Flutter SDK. It comes inbuilt. So just as the name sounds, ChangeNotifier, so it provides change notification to its listener. That means if something is a change notifier, you can subscribe to its changes. So it's more like, let's say, observable. So if you're familiar with the terms arrest Java, arrest that, you should come across you should have come across observables and all that. So in provider, ChangeNotifier is one way to encapsulate your application state. So if you're building a simple application like this one we are trying to demonstrate now, we just need one ChangeNotifier. But in some complex application that you're building, you have several models, several classes, you definitely need different ChangeNotifiers. Okay, so you don't need to use ChangeNotifier with provider if you want, but I do. Whenever I'm using provider, I cannot do without ChangeNotifier. I just love using it. So in this our counter app, we are going to create a class. So I'm just going to create a folder here and name it state management. Okay, just call it state management. All right, so you can change it to whatever way you want, or you can change it to provider if you want. Then we are going to create a class, and I'm going to call this counter model. Okay, so this is more like where we are going to manage the counter and other stuff. So here I'm going to create a class and call it Did I just made a mistake there? Okay, sorry, I was supposed to put .dat, okay, to tell it that is a .dat file. All right, so we have the class and we have the counter model. So now we are going to extend, because we want to use a change notifier in this class to subscribe to changes. I'm going to extend the change notifier. You can see it comes with Flutter inbuilt, and you can see it's coming from Cupertino. No, it's not supposed to be Cupertino that. So it comes from the Flutter Foundation .dat. Yeah, so we need to install import this one, Flutter Foundation .dat, and we open it. So this is just like your normal class that you create. So all right, so now let's see the things we need to create. First, we need to create internal private state of the counter. So let's see this main.dat. So what is required here now? We need an integer, okay, that increments, and yeah, that's what we need. Okay, so this is the counter. We need a counter variable. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to create the counter variable, so integer, and it's going to be private. So I'll use the underscore here to make it private to this class, so other classes cannot access it. So I can just call this counter, and I will set it to 0 here. All right, and then I'm also going to create a getter. All right, so that getter is what we're going to use to access the counter whenever it changes in our widget, or any widget at all we are calling this ChangeNotify this class from, this counter model from. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'll create a type first. So it depends, if you are creating different variables, you can create all of them, and also you need to create a getter for them, because without the getter you won't be able to get the values from outside this particular class. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're going to create int, and I can call this get counter. Okay, and I'll call my get. Is this the best way to do this? I think I'm missing out something. Okay, so I go with my get first. So it is a getter, and then the name. Yeah, no. Okay, getter, and then the name, which is get counter. So this is the class you're going to call to get the counter whenever it increments. If it increments by 1 by 2, we're going to get it from here, and then you use your fat arrow function. Fat arrow. So I do call I learned how to call this fat arrow when I was working with JavaScript. And now we are going to call the counter. So we initialize it, set it to the counter. Okay, so whenever this counter changes, we assign the value to this get counter, and then our widget, or wherever we are calling this get counter, is going to update automatically for us. Okay, so we don't really need any much thing. Okay, so still in here, remember this is just a simple application. Okay, so still in here, I'm going to create a method to increment the counter. Okay, and then I'm also going to create another method to decrement counter. Okay, so now we have two methods. Okay, one for incrementing the counter and one for decrementing the counter. All right, so now what I'm going to do, I'll create a void method just like your normal method. So I'll call this increment counter. Okay, and yep, just a function. Okay, then I can just call counter plus plus, that is incremented by 1, or if you can do +2 to increment it by 2. Remember, it's the similar thing they did here, counter plus plus. All right, but we want to change everything from this side now. Okay, void increment counter. So note there is one code that is specific to ChangeNotifier, and it's the call of notify listeners. So whenever you have counter, once you do whatever you want to update on the widget side, whenever it's called, you put it there. So in our case, we want this counter to increment by 1, and then we call notify listener. So this notify listener is more like calling set state inside a stateful builder, a stateful widget. It's more like calling a set state to rebuild the widget. So whenever you call notify listener, it will change the app's UI. Okay, so to increment the counter. So whenever we call increment counter, it will increment the counter, and then we'll call notify listener. So then it will now inform the listeners, any listener that is listening to this particular class, it will tell them that hey, something has changed, so you need to update the widget ASAP. Okay, so now I'm going to create another method. So this one is for decrementing the counter, so we just call it decrement counter. All right, and I will just call counter minus minus negative negative, and then once it's been decremented, I can now call notify listener to notify all my listeners that hey, something has changed, so you need to update your widgets real quick. Okay, so you can as well use this to, if you're making API call, create a function to call connect to HTTP to the API, and once you get the data, let's say if response is equal to 200, you get the data, you can create a list here and also create a getter list, and then assign the value to the list, this list that you're going to create here. Okay, so the getter is already getting, so this getter is just basically communicating with this one, and then whenever you update or you get data whatsoever, you assign it to this integer, this private variable you created, because this one automatically is already getting the value, so you don't need to work with get counter. This get counter is only required if you want to get this counter, this private counter, from an external widget. Okay, all right, so the next one I said I was going to talk about is the ChangeNotifierProvider. So is the widget that provides an instance of a ChangeNotifier to its descendants. So this one comes with a provider package, it's not inbuilt in Flutter. Okay, so I already know where I'm going to put the ChangeNotifierProvider, above the widget that needs to access it, but the best place I put my own is inside the main.dat. Okay, so this app, I'm just going to rebuild it. Okay, just change everything, and yeah, just make it look different. All right, so now we have this material app. Okay, these are main.dat, so we have our material app. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to change this. I normally wrap the ChangeNotifier with, like, to be the parents of my material application. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll just remove this one. Okay, just comment it. All right, so I'm just trying to make things simple and understandable for you guys. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put the ChangeNotifierProvider here, and it has create. So create basically, it's a function that takes a context, and then I can return the class I want to listen to. In our case is the change model, which is the class I want to listen to. All right, so I'm just going to call change model here. Is it change counter model? Okay, all right, okay, you need to import this. Okay, import provider, and also import this one as well. Okay, and that's it, and we can close this. Okay, is it return? Yeah, we can close that, and now I can format this properly. Okay, so let me just format this. Oh, where did I go? Okay, so I will just format this properly. Okay, and then here I have the child widget. So basically I'm just going to return my material app. All right, and this is it. So I wrap it with the ChangeNotifierProvider to just register this counter model, and then I return the child as the material widget. So in some cases you might want to create, you want to provide more than one class. Okay, let's say building a big project, and you don't have counter model alone, you have other models that extends to ChangeNotifier. So what you want to do, instead of using the ChangeNotifierProvider, you want to use the MultiProvider. So the MultiProvider helps us to provide more than wants us to provide more than one class. Okay, so what I'm going to do is if we run this one and go with this, it's still going to work. Okay, but I want to show you how to subscribe to different classes. Okay, so what we're going to do now, I'm going to I'm going to remove this first. Okay, so this is my material app. I remove it and also remove this one as well. So what I'm going to do is just to return, I'm just going to return MultiProvider. Okay, so if you want to work with this in your application, you can. If you don't want, you can work with the other one, assuming if you have only one class you want to listen to. Okay, so this provider, it provides a list of ChangeNotifierProvider. Okay, so it's a list. So inside here, okay, so I'm seeing some error. We have MultiProvider. Okay, we have the providers, and inside here now I'm going to return the ChangeNotifierProvider. Okay, and it takes the create method, and this one takes a context, and then we can return the class, which is counter model. Okay, I think something is not nice here. Okay, so I think I need to import this. Is it add required argument providers? Okay, sorry, I was supposed to put a semicolon here, that's why. Okay, so I put a semicolon, and now we are going to return the child. So the child basically is going to be the material app. Okay, so from the material app you can then call any other app you want, and that's just it. Okay, so here we are expected to put something, and that thing is missing, which is comma. Okay, so I'm going to format this properly. Okay, so now you see we have this one ChangeNotifier. So if you have another ChangeNotifierProvider, we can add it here, and that is if we have another ChangeNotifier class. Okay, I believe you understand what I'm trying to explain here. So assuming we have another ChangeNotifier class, we just change this to that class we want to listen to. If you have any other one, you can add as many as you want, since you are using MultiProvider. But in our case, we are only using one class, which is the counter model, to increment the counter. I can decide to change it back and remove this MultiProvider, but no need, I've already done it, so let me just leave it like this. It's still going to work, no issues so far. So let me do a hot restart to be sure that my app is still running. Okay, alright, so open the debug console. So if there's any error, we are going to see it here. Alright, so now that the counter model is provided to widgets in our app through the ChangeNotifierProvider and the help of MultiProvider as well, so we can start making use of it. So to actually make use of it and to get these values to increment this counter, we are going to work with something called the consumer widget. Alright, so the consumer widget works with types. So without the type, it won't know the class you want to work with. So we must specify the type of the model that we want to access. So in our case, it's going to be the counter model. Alright, so let me do this real quick. So right here we have the title, all this stuff. I can leave all this stuff, is not really needed. And one exciting thing about Provider, you can change your widget from stateful widget to a stateless widget, and it's still going to work perfectly. Alright, so now what we want to do is to use the consumer. So I don't need this. Okay, so I'm just going to remove it. This one as well, I don't need it. So let me just make it to be like an empty string. So just say counter goes here. Okay, so just make it like that. So this increment counter, we don't really know what to increment, so let me just return a normal function. Alright, so run the app and we should just see the test. Okay, so now let's see where we are going to put the consumer. Basically the widget we want to access, the widget that we want to access that class, that we're going to put it. So in our case, we can see we have the center widgets, the column widget. Okay, so I think I'm just, since we want the floating action button to actually access it, that is to call something is wrong somewhere. Okay, something is definitely wrong somewhere. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to key this up. Okay, so let me run it again. Something is definitely wrong. Okay, so while this is running, if you look very well properly here inside this stateful widgets, we have the scaffold widget, we have the app bar, we have the center widget, which is from the body, and we also have the floating action button. In our case, we want to increment the counter whenever we click on press, and we also want to change increment, put the value of the counter whenever it changes right here. So in this case now, there is no better widget that we can wrap with to actually, so that this floating action button will be able to access it. And the only widget that is above all is the scaffold widget. So the best place I think we can put this now is the scaffold widget, because we want all of them to access it. So what I'll do, I'm going to wrap this widget with the consumer widget. All right, so this consumer widget also have a builder method. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to use a stream builder here, because it will help us and to make use of builder, and also we can return the widget we want to return. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to change all this stuff to a consumer widget because it does not require a stream. And the consumer, remember I said that it actually works with type, just the way we have for stream builder. Okay, so I'm going to change this to a consumer. Okay, a consumer widget. So I'm going to remove the builder as well. Okay, then here I'm going to add the type. Okay, so remove this. Okay, so I'm going to add the type of the class we want to access its property, which values, which is the counter model. So what I'm going to do, so don't mind the errors that is showing right now. So I'm just going to import return the counter model there. Okay, so without the type, the provider package will not be able to help us. Okay, so with the type, we are just telling the provider package to, hey, use this value. Okay, go get the contents of this class and see what it offers and use it inside this widget. Okay, so the only required argument of the consumer widget is the builder. So which is this builder? Builder is a function that is called whenever the change notifier changes. Okay, so whenever this change notifier changes, that is, in other words, when we call the notify listener, that is when the change notifier changes, and then the consumer is going to get these changes and then review the widget for us. So the builder has 3 arguments. So the first one is the context. So I believe that's why it's showing this error. So the first one is the context, and the second required argument is actually the data itself we want to get, which is more like the instance of the change notifier. So is what we want to get from the counter model class. So we can use the data in the model to define what the user UI should look like at any given point. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to call this data. Okay, and then lastly we have the child, which is the third argument. So it's just there for optimization. Okay, so if you want a large widget sub3 under your consumer that doesn't change when the model changes, you can construct it under the, like, using the child widgets to do that. Okay, so I'm going to treat that in a later video. Okay, so you can just use child, but in this case we are not really making use of child, so I can just return an underscore there. Okay, I'm not making use of the child, so just return an underscore. I have never used the child before. Yeah, let me be sincere with you. Yeah, I've never used that. I only use the data to just get what I want, and that's it. Okay, so but before I show you how to consume this stuff, I need to run this, and it's actually telling me that insufficient storage. Okay, so that means I need to delete some stuff from my emulator. So let me see which app I'm going to delete right now. Alright, so that has been uninstalled. So let me run it again. Okay, so now we have the app up and running and we have the counter goes here. So what I'm going to do now is to utilize this data that is coming from here. So by default, you can see our counter is currently at 0. And if I call get counter now, it should be 0 as also. Alright, so what I'm going to do now, instead of this, I'm going to change it to the data. So just call, since it's a variable, okay, so I will want to wrap this in a string interpolation, I believe. Okay, your $sign and those curly braces. So I can just call data, and which is coming from here. And if I call dot, I should be able to access the get counter. Okay, so which is an integer. If I refresh this now, you can see it's going to go back to 0 because this stuff is currently at 0. Okay, so now we have gotten the value there to be 0. Alright, so now I want to increment, I want a button to increment and also decrement the counter. So what I'm going to create a row here. Okay, so let me just create a row, or a column should go. So let it be a column, and okay, and do this. So this one is going to be for decrement. So dot remove. Okay, all right, so let's see, let me save this. Okay, it's really going up above where I don't want it to go. So let's use the main axis alignment. Let's say space evenly. Okay. Alright, so I don't want it to be there, so let's just use the cross axis alignment and bring it to the center. Dot end, I believe end should do. Okay, so we can leave it like this. So this one, when we click on this button, is going to increment the counter. When we click on this button as well, it's going to decrement the counter. This one will increment the counter as well. Okay. Let me do a hot restart here. Alright, so everything seems okay. So what I'm going to do inside here now is just to call this function, this method, which is increment counter. Okay, so once I click on this button to call increment counter and then call notify listeners, and once I call notify listeners, this widget is going to update. Alright, so let's do this real quick. Data is actually coming from this consumer, the instance of the ChangeNotifier, which I created here. So you just call data dot increment counter. Okay, and that's it. And if I save this now, and if I click on this, it will be incremented, and this value is going to change really quick. Yeah, you see that changes? It's actually changing. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing here and call data dot decrement counter as well, and save it. And if I click this, it's going to reduce the counter by 1, and this one is going to increment it by 1. All right, so you see how awesome it works. So let's see if this stuff is actually rebuilding the widget. Okay, so I'm going to call print state rebuilding. Let's see if it's actually rebuilding the widget whenever we click on the increment counter. Okay, at first state rebuilding because I just do a hot restart now. So let me click on it. When the counter increases, let's see if you see the counter is increasing now, but it's not reprinting this stuff again. It only prints it once. Okay, so this one just helps us because you can see the whole widget is not updating, unlike when we call set state. All right. Okay, so this is cool. This is so sweet and beautiful. So all our widgets is not actually refreshing. Okay, so the final one I want you guys to know is the Provider.of. Sometimes you don't really need the data in the model to change the UI, but you still need to access it. For example, let's say maybe you have a kind of a list and you want to clear the data. Okay, so you can use the provider to clear the data, but let me show you how to also use a provider to listen to these changes and change these values instead of using a consumer. Okay, so with the provider now, we can just declare it anywhere, so we don't need to bother about the children that are inside the consumer. Okay, so to do this real quick, I'm going to just Ctrl Z to go back to the previous pages, the previous stage of this stuff. But I think I also need to leave okay, so I need to leave this one as well, so I don't need to change this. So what I'll do, I'll just remove the consumer. Okay, so just remove the consumer here. We don't really need consumer anymore. And the data, so let's just okay, leave it this way. Okay, so I'm also going to remove this. Okay, so I think I'm not missing out on something. Okay, so save it now. We have everything going back to normal as if nothing happened. Okay, so now let me show you. This video is getting long, but let me just show you this stuff real quick. So the provider, we are going to create a final variable, and I'll call it the data, because yeah, it's still providing the data for us. Then I will say provider, yeah, the provider Provider.of. Okay, so off, and we also need to specify the type of the class we want to access. In our case, it still remains the counter model. Okay, and then you can put your context and terminate it there. All right, so that's it. And something is wrong. Contests, okay, instance of context can be assigned, okay, access in an initializer. So I think the best place we're going to use this is inside the build method. So I'm going to put it inside here. Okay, so now we can access the context. So if you want to set the listener to false, you can set listing to false, because by default it's already true. So we're going to experiment on this both stuff and see how it works. Okay, so now let's just leave it, let's just remove the listener. Okay, so now what we're going to do now to access this stuff, I'm just going to do the same thing we did initially, which was calling data.getCounter, and here I'm going to increment. Okay, let me save it. It should be 0 here. Okay, and now let me increment the counter. Okay, it's not 0 because initially we have already incremented all those stuff. So now I can just call data.increment counter and do the same thing here, which is to decrement. So I'll call data.decrement counter as well. Okay, so let's save this. And if I press, you can see it's actually increasing by 1. Okay, all right, so now I can as well, let's experiment with the listener to see how what it does. So I'll change that to okay, listing false, and let me save it and see what it does, because I've actually not used this listing to false before. I just set it to true by default. Okay, so let's see if this value is going to increase. Okay, so in this case you can see it's not actually listening to the changes. You can see though the changes is actually taking effect, but it's not listening, and thereby is not updating the widgets. Okay, so that's what that listening to false mean. So the best thing is just to leave it to true, since you want to listen to the changes. Basically that's the main purpose why we introduce this stuff here, to actually listen to the changes and change the counter. You can see how it's just simple, no function here, everything is just good. And I think we can as well change this stuff to a stateless widget and still get what we want. Can we do that? So let's see. Okay, so it's incrementing. So now let's see if we can change this stuff to a stateless widget instead of a stateful widget. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll copy the whole of this, Control C, okay, X, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to remove this, and this is basically our home page. So let me just call, okay, I don't need this title as well, so let's just get rid of this. Okay, so I just create a stateless widget here and call it my home page. Okay, and then I'm going to return that widget I just copied. Okay, widget title, we can just say provider app. Okay, now let me do a hot restart. You can see in this case now we did not use any stateless widget. Remember, a stateless widget, the state is mutable, so you cannot change anything. But now we are using provider. Can we still change the state? Okay, let's try. I just did a hot restart now, and if I click, it's still updating. Okay, you can see. So with provider, you are certain that your app is still going to work, or you can still update the UI even without using stateful widget. So I think it's time for you to say goodbye to stateful widget. But it's not really necessary, because sometimes a stateful widget is still good, like if you're creating an ephemeral state application, okay, like the basic counter app that we just got. Okay, but if you're building a complex app, you can decide not to use stateful widgets, just go with stateless widgets, and the provider will handle all the stuff for you. You can see how it's updating, and we are not seeing any kind of, okay, hey, this UI thread is this, all those stuff, because it's just stateless widget, and our app is going to work normal as we planned. Alright guys, so this is everything I wanted you to know about provider. With this, I believe you can create apps for on your own, and you can actually just play with it, make beautiful looking application. I want to see your creation, maybe probably if you do it, put it down in the comment section below. So there's actually a thought that just came through my mind, like showing you guys how to build a status saver, like more like a WhatsApp status saver application using Flutter framework. So if you really want me, if you would love me to create a video like that, just put it down in the comment section below, and depending on the number of votes, I promise I'm definitely going to make a video on that. So guys, thank you so much for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to like, don't forget to share. I'll see you in the future.